I'm rather excited about this one today because today I get to talk to you about two things I like talking about: politics and history. So, what are we talking about today? You may have noticed the title of the video, so that gives sort of away what I'm talking about. But why are we talking about this in particular? Well, two big things have happened very recently, and one that is happening this year that always brings this topic back up. But we'll get into that in a bit. So, what happened recently? Well, turns out Boris Johnson, once again, being accused of corruption, surprising no one. But what's very interesting is, of course, the nature of these texts that he had about the wallpaper, promising to look into bringing back the new great exhibition. So, what was that to begin with? What was the Grand Exhibition, and what is the Grand Exhibition 2.0 that this Tory donor was so, you know, interested in and essentially paying for Boris Johnson's wallpaper to, well, bring back? Well, bit of a history lesson. So, way back in the Victorian times, there was a very big movement to basically get the UK to become more libertarian, to become a free market libertarian paradise, very much promoted at the time by the Austrian School of Economics. And a lot of essentially high, very influential people were involved in this movement back in the time, both in the Commons, both in like the landowning, the the landowners, the nobility. Sort of this was like the thing to do. But of course, again, if you study history of that time and what happened and the consequences of this, it failed. It lasted. Britain's, shall we say, grand experiment of libertarianism economics lasted no more than 6 years before it was very quickly put to bed. And essentially, one of the big keystones, the big kicking off of this period is known as the Grand Exhibition. This was the big Crystal Palace where essentially it was the world's first sort of trade fair. Come and have a look at all these things from around the empire, that you can buy from Britain. Look how good Britain is. And it seems to be that's what is being promoted again. Because, as I've said before, that ideology of right-wing economical free market fundamentalism has been making a comeback. And these people are now pretty much in charge of the Conservative Party at the moment. They are the far right of the party that have effectively taken over. They are the ones responsible for Brexit and our current mess as well. And this is what they want to do. They want to create, as we've said before, Singapore on the Thames. But how does this relate to Empire 2.0 and the bringing back, of course, of this grand exhibition? Well, first of all, you've had those texts, which are what we talked about, was one reason. But why is it tying into Empire 2.0? Well, for those of you who are of a sporting nature, maybe inclined, will know that the Commonwealth Games are coming up again. And whenever it's the Commonwealth Games, this always, without a shadow of a doubt, gets brought up. The whole idea that we should be re-engaging with the Commonwealth and creating the Commonwealth into an economic bloc, because wouldn't that be so fantastic? It'll be led by us, we'll get to dictate all the laws and everyone will fall in line and it'll all be fantastic, wonderful, happy family, empire restored. But I can guarantee you we will be seeing that messaging talked about again and again and again. But the Commonwealth is not an economic bloc. It's not even technically a political bloc at this point. It's just a meeting where stuff gets discussed, and that's it. It lasts a day. Nothing major is done. Of course, the main key players in it, of course, are the UK, Australia, and Canada. And quite frankly, they're not interested in recreating the Empire or Commonwealth either. So it's like the forgotten grandfather clock that MPs and especially these Brexiteers love to get out every so often and go, oh, look at the Commonwealth. Isn't it fantastic? Well, time to put it back in the closet until next time. That's literally what happens every time, every single time. But going back to this, it's really important to understand because the Brexiteers and these free market fundamentalists picture that as like the golden age of British international trade, forgetting, of course, at that time, pretty much the British Empire was at its height. And of course, they forget how the trade in the British Empire actually worked. So their big grand plan was essentially to have zero tariffs, that all imports into the UK would be 0%, and we would charge 0% going out. So there was no tariffs, completely 0%, no tariffs whatsoever. Remember, this only lasted 6 years. So that's just to, if they ever do achieve the dream, probably the time length of how it will probably affect the UK as well, maybe even shorter. But they forget, of course, about the empire and how it functioned and operated, because we had all these colonies, but these colonies were not free to trade with other people. Australia took all of its resources, sent it to the UK, and then was only specifically allowed to buy from the UK. Nowhere else, not even other colonies, because that's how the system worked. And they forget that. They forget that the British Empire had captive markets. They extracted all this wealth, all these resources, put it into the UK. They were turned in the factories and so on and so on. And then all those goods did go to obviously other countries, but predominantly they went to the captive markets of the colonies that we had. And of course, we don't have that anymore. So unless they are genuinely serious about re-establishing colonies, which, let's face it, no one's going to be for at all, you can tell why this is a constant fantasy and a pipe dream. And yet you are going to hear this year, I guarantee you, we are going to cover stories this year, and someone is going to bring up Empire 2.0 or Commonwealth 2.0 or the new Commonwealth or something like that as some sort of brand new trade bloc for them all to salivate over as some sort of new goal for Brexit. This is what Brexit about. This is what Brexit's about. This is what will make Brexit the buccaneering country that it once was. And yeah, it's not going to work. It's not going to work at all. Because again, the Brexiteers do not understand history. And of course, you've only got to look at history yourself around that time period, and even go and read historically, like the newspapers, what the newspapers were saying about it at the time. They themselves were, again, some economists in the UK were very, very harsh critics of the Austrian economical school and thought at that time of what they wanted to do, and were incredibly harsh against the people pushing it. None more so than Queen Victoria's husband, who was the biggest advocate and easily like their number one superstar on this circuit. So, yeah, expect to see the term Empire 2.0 thrown about a lot this year, unfortunately. But again, as always, thank you very much for watching. Please do remember to hit that like, share, and subscribe button. And of course, down below, there are links to my Patreon page and a one-off donation link called Buy Me a Coffee, where you can, buy me a coffee. And as always, thanks for watching, and we'll see you all